Hello and welcome to the sewing studio. Today I'm going to show you how to make this really useful sewing caddy. So what you're going to need to make this is some gridded filing, which is iron-on, a pack of mini charms. You'll also need a fat quarter, which is for the lining of the pouch and the lining of the pockets, and you'll also need a long quarter for the binding. So I'm going to show you why I use the gridded filing. It makes it so much easier when you're using these mini charms. So if you lay them onto your filing and you line them up, it takes a bit of getting used to. So you line them all up and you do 4 rows. So if I show you the back of this, you can see. So you're doing 4 across by 7 down. So I would just take some time to sort the colour so it looks a really nice design. You haven't got too many of the same colour next to each other. And you pop that on and you would then iron those onto your filing. And the reason we do this is instead of joining these small pieces so it all goes out of line, is when you've got them ironed on, they look something like this. And then what you do is you just turn it over and you machine all the way to the bottom. For each row, you just go all the way to the bottom. Now this one I've also gone across just in advance so I can show you what to do. So when you go across, you do each row and you literally just using a 1/4 inch seam machine all the way to the bottom. And it's so much easier because you haven't got all these little pieces of fabric. And then when you go across, you snip into the fabric. So if I show you, let's just get my scissors out of my caddy. If I show you, snip very carefully, but be careful not to cut your stitch in. You go like that, so that when you fold it this way, because you're now going to go across your seams, you can push one going one way, one going the other, so that you know that they're butted together, so you get a lovely crisp point there. So you do that first of all. So when that's all joined together, you have something that looks like this. So this one's all been put together. You then take your scraps of wadding and you lay them on top of your squares like this. You then lay your lining fabric, so that's this one, on top. And you set that to one side. And then you do your pockets. Now your pockets are done in exactly the same way, but because you've only got 42 squares in the pack, you will need to use a bit of extra fabric for the back pocket, i.e. this one, because that's going to go over the top, so you're not going to see that lining. You're still going to see all your lovely your mini charms. Now, if you wanted just 2 pockets, you would just sew down this centre point, and it's really important that you do this before you put it on there, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to stitch this on here and then not be able to get anything in that pocket. So we're just going to go over to the sewing machine and we are going to, I'm just going to do this with say 2 big pockets this time just to show you. You will need your walking foot because we're sewing through 2 layers of wadding and 4 layers of fabric. So I'm just going to the sewing machine to sew that. So all I'm doing now is I'm going to just sew down this centre line. So you could, if you wanted to, do a fancy zigzag stitch. But for the purpose of today, I'm just literally sewing straight down that middle line there. And this is going to have 2 pockets. So that then gets laid onto here like this. So you've got your squares, you've got your wadding, you've got your lining, and then each of your pockets is lined with scraps and got scraps of wadding tucked inside. I literally just tucked it inside like that. So I've then machined down here. And what I should really have done is gone backwards and forwards at the start to just reinforce that stitch. And then to do your binding, you need a 2.5 inch strip of contrasting fabric. So I've used the same one as I've used here. And you press that in half. So it's folded in half like that. And then I'm going to use these binding clips because I do like these rather than pins, especially when we've got so many layers that we're going through. And to do your binding, you are just going to clip your binding on here like this. She says it's easier than with pins. So you clip it on like that. You would have a long piece, obviously big enough to go all the way round. And you'd go all the way round and you'd mitre your corners. So you can see here, these corners are mitred. And then you would machine that again with your walking foot because you're now going through another 2 layers of fabric. And when that's machined on, you would flip that back. So imagine this has been machined now. You would flip that back and that would be your binding, and then you would just slip stitch it down there. The reason I've done it this way round is because I want it to hold the pockets rather than if I'd have started it and machined it that side. So you'll find if you do it this way round, it's much easier to manage. So just take a little time in lining it all up, either pinning or clipping it together, machine all the way round, and then flip it back and slip stitch it, and you'll end up with a sewing caddy that looks like this. Now, I've used these colourful poppers, but you can use a press stud, or you can use, there's some antique brass looking poppers that you can get as well. And it's just whatever you want it to be, whether you want it to have 2 pockets, 4 pockets, and just line up and then put your popper on to close it. So it's a really fun little project to do. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you next time here in the sewing studio.